Welcome to the show. You're listening to Green Hell, a Vietnam War podcast. Join me as I explore the history of the Vietnam War, remember the sacrifices and experiences of those who were there, and preserve those lessons learned and paid for through blood and unimaginable human suffering. All right, welcome back to the show, everybody. It is Saturday, January 25th. I'm your host, Stephen Comstock, and as always, it's an honor and a privilege to be able to speak with you today about the war in Vietnam. In today's episode, we're going to discuss subterfuge, espionage, intelligence, and counterintelligence. But first, I just want to mention that I've upgraded my podcast microphone to the Samson Q9U. I think that there's a noticeable audio quality gain in this particular product. I hope you do too. Feel free to let me know. Also created a new Facebook page for the podcast. It's called Green Hell Podcast, and I would love for you to leave a message or write a review, or you can just ask me a question. Hit me up on Messenger. And I have an email address for you. If you want to shoot me an email, if you're old school like me, email's kind of the go-to, then my email address is 7th stanza at proton.me. That's 7th stanza at proton.mikeecho. And as always, you can also reach me on X at greenhell6969. Okay, so what are we talking about today? Subterfuge, espionage, counterintelligence, and intelligence. And this is important because this continues from 1945 all the way through 1975. The battle lines ebb and flow, the military strength of the Viet Minh, the French, and the United States, and the Viet Cong ebbs and flows. But one thing remains the same, and that is a shadowy spy war mixed with guerrilla war is taking place at all times in southern Vietnam. I'm starting off with the subject of the Saigon execution. It's a very well-known photograph from the Vietnam War, 1968, taken by Pulitzer Prize winner Eddie Adams. And what it is, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, is Brigadier General Nguyen Nhap Lon point blank blowing the brains out of Viet Cong prisoner Nguyen Van Lem. And it's become one of the most iconic images of the war because of its just graphic, upfront, brutal nature. And for those who have never seen it, I don't know if it's worth looking up. It's pretty gruesome. It's pretty messed up. But it's what it is you've got Brigadier General Nguyen Nhap Lon with a revolver or some other type of pistol. I don't think it's a revolver. Not that it matters. Against this dude's head, basically. And the image is the moment that the bullet is entering his brain, and you see the facial expression of the dude as the bullet's 1/2 inch inside this dude's cranium. He's definitely dead, but it's almost as if there's a flicker of light still in his eye, and you're almost seeing it evaporate. That's what makes it such an iconic picture, but it encapsulates a lot of the brutality of war, the lack of judge, jury, right, sentence, a hearing. It was the things that the United States believes in or purports to believe in, right? Like you have the right to a fair trial. You have the right for an impartial judge. You have the right for, all the things, right? But what we're seeing is the United States ally, South Vietnamese chief of police, who happens to be a brigadier general in Saigon, doming a dude in broad daylight in the middle of the street. And so there's one aspect of it, right? Now, this is where we're getting into the kind of the subterfuge aspect of this image, and we'll tie it back into the general theme of this episode in a second. And what that is the juxtaposition between what the United States is claiming to stand for and represent in the war in Vietnam, in Saigon, southern Vietnam, and what's being executed on the ground for right or wrong, as we'll see here in a second. But here we are as Americans sitting back in our living rooms being exposed to this unimaginable graphic violence that 1968 mom and pop and Johnny, Jill, and everybody's living their lives in the United States. Like this is a new era of war reporting being broadcast to your living room TV, where after family dinner, maybe the kids went to bed and you're sipping on some scotch before you hit the hay. And now they're showing you about all the terrible things going down in Vietnam. And this is supposed to be a righteous war. Well, like all things, narratives are basically just propaganda. All propaganda is the promotion of one narrative over the other at the expense of the truth. So, as it turns out, right, yes, this general did execute this Viet Cong prisoner of war. And I'm not condoning straight execution. That's not the way that America was founded. It's not the way that this works. It's not the way decency is upheld, right? But regardless, that image was pushed out as kind of an anti-war propaganda for the United States. But the reality was that the dude that was shot was reportedly responsible for the murder of a lieutenant colonel in the South Vietnamese police, his 6 children, his wife, and his 80-year-old mother. So seeing somebody get domed without any context, you're going to feel bad for the guy, perhaps a little more than you would otherwise if you knew the full context. But how it's being spun in the United States is presenting a narrative. That's an example of propaganda. That's an example of subterfuge. Nothing new in war, nothing new in life, nothing new in 2025, that's for sure. The fact is, in the Vietnam situation, subterfuge was a huge part of the war from 1945 through the entirety and beyond. Probably without subterfuge, there never would have been an effective resistance. You find out that the Viet Cong murdered an officer in the military police, his 6 children, his wife, and his 80-year-old mother. You might have a different perspective. So, as it turns out, even the photographer, Mr. Adams, expressed regret over how the photograph was interpreted. He felt that it unfairly damaged Mr. Lone's reputation without capturing the full context of Mr. Lim's actions or the chaos of war. So anyway, I'll let you mull over the moral correctness of executing a prisoner of war. In a perfect world with ideals that we should all strive to achieve and maintain, you don't execute prisoners, regardless of how vile their actions may have been to warrant a point-blank execution in the middle of the street. The ideals and principles that we should strive for is justice through a legal process. Anyway, I digress from that. Let's talk about the definition of subterfuge and then we'll move on. So, the definition of subterfuge that I have pulled up here says the use of deceit to achieve one's goals or to disguise one's true intentions or activities. Subterfuge involves trickery, evasion, or cunning to mislead others. It can include tactics like misdirection, false pretenses, or creating a facade to hide the real purpose or the true nature of an operation. A different example that fits that definition might be if you're a country and you go do military exercises on a border of a neighbor that you intend to invade, but you cast the perception that you're only doing exercises, you're only doing maneuvers. You have no intentions to send in an entire tank division to capture Kyiv and knock out the Ukrainian government, right? As we saw in 2022. Also, a false flag operation. That's an example of subterfuge because you're using trickery, misdirection, and false pretenses to justify a military action that may not have been permissible otherwise. An example from Vietnam is the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which a lot of people think it was a false flag operation that ultimately granted President Johnson broad military powers because it motivated Congress to widen the war against the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese army. Whether it was or not, we'll get into later down the road when we finally get to the United States' involvement. For now, we'll just note it and move on to another example of subterfuge, the Iran-Contra situation. So the United States was selling arms to Iran, and using the profits generated from those sales to fund the Contras, which was a paramilitary organization fighting against the Sandistas government, which was a communist government in Nicaragua. And in so doing, they bypassed a congressional restriction on that kind of thing called the Boland Amendment. So good examples all around. When it comes to money, funding, cash flow to certain activities, subterfuge plays a big role. But you can even apply subterfuge to the human-on-human contact of spies, double agents, counterintelligence. It's kind of a wide open term that encapsulates a lot of other things, which we're going to go into next. And that next topic is going to be espionage. And the definition of espionage that I have pulled up says, the practice of spying or using spies to collect information covertly, particularly militarily, political, or commercial secrets from a hostile or rival entity. Espionage involves gathering information through observation, theft, or other clandestine methods, often for strategic advantage in warfare, diplomacy, or business. All right, so that can be as broad as, General X is banging some chick. I bet his wife wouldn't like that. Can we get some pics and can we get some damning evidence? Maybe we can coerce him to the negotiating table or to do X or to give up Y. And you can apply that same thing to politicians, businessmen, anybody and everybody that you want to leverage into cooperation or to get them to do something, right? Maybe you've racked up some insane gambling debts, right? And the Viet Minh happen to take notice because they've got people everywhere and they're especially involved in the underground enterprises of Saigon, since that's where they can generate off the books cash flow, right? And they say to you, hey, if you don't pay your debt, we're gonna kill you. But if you do kill someone for us, we'll forgive your debt. Here's who they are. Here's where they are. Here's how you're going to do it. You do it. You get away with it. Then you're good. We're good. And if you get caught, we don't know you. You're on your own. All right. That's an example of the blending of subterfuge and espionage. You identified him through intelligence gathering, espionage activities, right? Maybe he was at a bar drinking too much sake and got a little tipsy and told some sexy looking honeypot all his dirty secrets, and she happens to be a Viet Minh spy, and she creates a dossier on you because you happen to be well equipped to get to this particular person. And also, by the way, we happen to know that we have leverage that we can use against you, right? So subterfuge in the sense that she was a honeypot, and espionage that she gathered the intelligence, and then coercion to commit an act of political assassination, right, for debt forgiveness. Leverage generates coercive power. All right, so intelligence, we're going to gloss over. Most everybody generally gets the concept, right? Like, you're looking for that thing, that piece of intelligence, that piece of data that's going to tip the scales. Somebody's coming, you happen to gain a piece of technological advancement. It can be a wide range of particular things, right? So we're going to go into the types of collection, and that'll help parse out the different types of intelligence that can be gathered. But for example, you have human intelligence, right? And that's like, hey, you got spies, you got people on the ground, you got people talking to other people, eavesdropping, networking, gaining intel, the old-fashioned way. Then you have SIGINT, right? Signals intelligence. We've intercepted radio comms, we've tapped your wires. We're getting a picture of what you're saying because we're literally capturing the physical sound waves or digital footprint of that sound, right? And then you have IMINT, or imagery intelligence. That's your satellites, your overhead planes, flying around, drones, anything that can see from the sky and take a picture of it so that it can be analyzed. Or you can have spy cameras. You can have people in buildings with pretty insane cameras that can see really far, hiding in blinds, looking for a target, waiting to capture associations that they meet up with. So then from intelligence derives the concept of counterintelligence. Okay, counterintelligence assumes that we know that the adversary is spying on us. And in order to identify who could be spying on us and to throw them off their game, we're going to put out fake news. We're going to put out little tidbits of information that might leak out to somebody that we have planted on the other side. And then if it does, we know where the leak came from, right? Because we only disseminated this intelligence to a certain number of people. And then you can start to track down like, oh, hey, where'd you hear that from? Oh, Johnny told you? Where'd he hear it from? Oh, Jamie? Jamie was one of 5 people we told. And everybody that we ask keeps saying that, oh yeah, somebody heard it from so-and-so who heard it from Jamie. Boom, link discovered, purge the leak. Well, plug the leak, I guess, but you get what I'm saying. A kind of off-the-wall example for you ufologists, UFO, UAP followers out there who are interested in the topic, when Bob Lazar comes forward and gives his account of all the intelligence briefs that he had to read and what the read-on said, and he was like, yeah, well, who knows how much of it was true, because any of it could have been false, so that they can tell based on if details from that start to emerge, then hey, we've got a leaky shop. We got to do some further investigating. Maybe we got to start identifying who could be likely leakers. All right, so now that we've discussed the definitions and we've covered the concepts, right? I'll just bring up and read some of this. It was a question I asked Grok, which is the XAI, which, not to segue too far off, but if you haven't messed around with Microsoft Copilot, ChatGPT, Grok, or I think even Facebook has one, you're really selling yourself short on a technological innovation that's here to stay. It's only going to get more useful. It's not going away. And it's more helpful than you have ever conceived, right? Like people my age were used to Googling things. Like, oh, Google that, right? Well, you don't need to Google anymore. Google's obsolete. You ask Grok, it tells you an answer. A long format, well thought. It doesn't tell you what you want to know. You ask it again in a different way, or you say, hey, you've told me this, but what about this? It's contextually aware. It will answer you 100 times faster and more precise than what it's going to be if you're looking through Google pages, reading blogs, subreddits, articles, and forums for an answer, right? You can dig deeper, right? That's the other thing. Copilot and Grok, they give you links to further research. So you ask it a question, it gives you a pretty generic statement, but it gives you links and you can drill down. So you're not just talking out of your ass. It's a game-changing research tool. It's a game-changing technological innovation, and it's not going away. So, if you want some advice, start using it. It's cool stuff. It's good for you. It'll make you smarter. It's going to make the world more efficient. All right. Anyway, I digress. What did I ask it? I said, can you give me a more detailed explanation on what it means to engage in espionage and counter-espionage? Explain like your audience is eager to imagine the scenarios that occurred during the first Indochina War and include both the Viet Minh and the French intelligence operation. Okay, so it gave me some scenarios, some scenes. It says espionage, imagining the scene, right? Okay, infiltrating the enemy. Picture a Vietnamese market in Saigon where a seemingly ordinary vendor is actually gathering information. This person might casually chat with French soldiers or officials, picking up bits of information about troop movements or upcoming operations. They might slip a small note into a loaf of bread or use a secret code in a transaction to pass on this intel to Viet Minh agents. Okay, all right, Grok, got it, thanks. That's actually a pretty solid concept and pretty good anecdotal event, right, that would have happened a lot during that time, but it captures the essence of what's going on, right? Okay, cool. Drilling down. Surveillance techniques. It says visualize French agents with their ears pressed against walls, using primitive listening devices to eavesdrop on conversations in cafes or through the thin walls of colonial homes. They may also be intercepting letters or using informants to track known nationalists. Love it. I'm nerding out, okay? I'm nerding out because that's exactly what was going down. The French were doing that. They were doing that exact thing. So were the Viet Minh, but I mean, the French controlled most of the postal service in the South, in the Saigon area for sure. So yeah, they would be tracking down people through reading their mail and using old school freaking James Bond 1968 technology, right? Even though this was the 40s. I mean, it was even more rudimentary, but you get what I'm saying. Also, it gives the example of the French running operations to infiltrate Viet Minh espionage cells by placing an agent who pretends to defect to the Viet Minh, making that person basically literally a double agent who is working for the French secretly, but is pretending to be a Viet Minh spy. And let's drill down into that for just 1 second. Think about what that means, right? You're pretending that you're a Viet Minh, like, hey, you've seen the error of the French, F the French, I'm with you, Viet Minh. And the Viet Minh are like, hell yeah, bro. You're in the intel service, like, we can use you. And you're like, absolutely, 100%. But the Viet Minh, they might not actually trust you either. So nobody can trust anybody is just the basic premise of being a spy. Because somebody on the inside of either organization may be acting with ulterior motives, and they may be using you because they don't trust you. So if you're a double agent playing one side against the other, presumably on behalf of one ultimate side that you pledge allegiance to, but somebody knows you're a double agent, then they can play you against that same side. So it gets crazy. It's not healthy. There's a lot of spy shows that kind of capture that. Like, by nature, you're being kind of psychotic. You're like being schizophrenic, literally in your actual life. And not only that, you get caught, you're killed, or you're tortured to death. That's a very real possibility. And to just further the point and to really nail home how cool Grok is, it has a whole little section in that answer it gave me. It says, the human element, moral ambiguity. Consider the lives of these spies and counter-spies, living with constant fear, guilt, or thrill. Each side might have individuals who genuinely believe in their cause, others who are coerced, and some who are simply playing both sides for personal gain. Think about the personal toll, betrayals, the psychological strain of leading a double life, or the dangers of being caught and executed. Imagine how this pervasive atmosphere of suspicion affected daily life. Neighbors might distrust each other, and simple conversations could be laden with hidden meanings or dangers. And there's really not a better case of this kind of super society of paranoia as there was in Vietnam at this time, because you were caught between, if you're just a normal person who's kind of apolitical, or yeah, you have opinions, but you're not necessarily radicalized or willing to die or get tortured for it, you're going to be like, hey, I don't know if anybody is a Viet Minh. I don't know if anybody is a French, but anybody could be, and you don't know. And that's exactly what it was. It was people's families were spying on each other. Some were Viet Minh, some were very much pro-France, and spies abounded everywhere for either side. And like Grok says, some were coerced, some had strong ideological beliefs, and others were just there playing both sides for personal gain. Not a healthy situation, and that sense of paranoia and general unrest was pervasive in South Vietnam, especially the big cities like Saigon, because the Viet Minh, without a full military arm and with very limited capacity to really fight the French in the South, they had to rely almost exclusively on covert activities, espionage, subterfuge, sabotage, guerrilla warfare, and the intelligence aspects imbued with each. And that's why you had terrorist activity, just simply to put so much psychological strain on the citizens of South Vietnam that they would just basically capitulate and be like, hey, yeah, you know what? Why are we defending these French assholes when we could just fight them because they should be our enemy anyway because they're dicks, and we can reduce this psychological oppressive burden that the VC and earlier before then the Viet Minh were dumping upon us. All right, everybody. So to close us out today, I'm going to briefly cover the curious case of the H122 incident. What the hell are you talking about, Stephen? Well, I'll tell you The H-122 incident is an incident that occurred in the Viet Minh's Military Intelligence Service in March 1948. The security services operating in Hanoi received a document that they believed came from the French titled Report by an Agent codenamed H-122. And in this report, it detailed the plans for the fall-winter offensive of 1948-49. The DRV considered it extremely accurate and reliable, meaning they were convinced that this document was legitimately obtained by the French, and they now knew that the French knew their plan. And if that's the case, that means that there's a mole working inside the Viet Minh's intelligence service. As you can imagine, people freaked out, and everybody's trying to figure out who the hell this mole is, and that's spreading throughout the entire Viet Minh military intelligence apparatus. Within a month or so, several hundred military cadres and officers at the regimental level were arrested and interrogated. Several people were tortured as they tried to flush out who this mole was. In total, about 200 military service individuals and 100 civilians were interrogated, a few of them tortured. Now, what happens when you apply too much force on anybody, you torture them or you put them through long, tedious interrogations, but you're too heavy-handed, people are just going to tell you whatever they think they need to tell you to make it stop. So under extreme psychological and physical duress, many of these people in the Viet Minh's custody for questioning regarding who the mole was or what they knew about it were just saying that they were working for the French or that they were working for some other non-Viet Minh anti-communist nationalist group. With that kind of pressure, people start making counter accusations. You know, the age-old adage, deny and levy counter accusations and admit nothing. That's what you do. Someone calls you a witch, you say, no, you're a witch, motherfucker. I ain't no fucking witch. I saw you fucking cutting a goat's entrails out and worshiping Satan last night. I know you're a witch. Deny, make counter accusations. And as it turns out, the only thing preventing communist infighting in the top levels of the Viet Minh was a guy named Tran Dong Ninh. Mr. Ninh was the Communist Party security chief, right? Pretty high up there. And this guy saved the whole situation because he was a cool-headed guy, known for being intelligent and fair, analytically minded. So he scrupulously and systematically investigated the whole situation with his security and intelligence officials, and he interviewed all the same people. He cross-checked their stories very carefully, and after some time of thorough consideration, he concluded that the French had mounted some counterintelligence operation against them that had poisoned their well and started to turn them against each other. It was an expert move. It worked perfectly. And if it hadn't been for his cool-headedness, it probably would have gotten to the point of inter-party, civil war. Now, I haven't been able to find the exact intelligence that the French used in this and why the DRV thought that it had to have come from the inner circle. But I suspect it's one of those things where it's like, okay, we know X, Y, and Z about your force, your capabilities, and your organization, and the weather, and the terrain, and everything else, right? You take it all together. We can kind of guess probably what you're going to do. And if we can guess good enough, and if we can sprinkle in just enough details to make it seem like we actually know what's going on, we can convince you to think that we really do know what's going on. And that's what the French did. So pretty brilliant strategy, almost worked, stopped by a pretty brilliant guy. And that's the story of the H-122 incident, a little known blip in the history of the First Indochina War. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. I'm going to make one final shout out to my Facebook page. Green Hell Podcast is the name of the page. Also, you can shoot me a message at my email, 7thstanza@proton.me, or you can hit me up on X. My Twitter handle, X handle, is at greenhell6969. One more note, I'm going to have a couple more episodes after this one that are just going to be kind of one-off topics, like how this one was about espionage and subterfuge and stuff. We're going to have another one about Mao Zedong, and we're going to have another one about the little-known Mai Trak and Mai Thui massacres. And beyond that, we're going to get back to the timeline, which, if you forget, we are in 1948. Operation Leah had just failed, so we're at the beginning of 1948, and we'll talk about that in a few episodes from now. All right, everybody, thanks for listening. As always, I appreciate the love and support. Keep it coming. Stay cool, stay brave, stay boisterous. Talk to you later.